I love the conversations that we've been able to have over these last several months.
Yes. Some that we can share with people and some we can't.
It's true.
There
are conversations. Yes, there are some conversations we have after we do signings at a convention, which is the time we get to actually hang out in person.
That's right. Which I do actually look forward to. Yes, I mean these are fun, but it's nice to hang. That's true.
Exactly, but I mean, I look forward to having conversations with people who have something to say.
You know, it's interesting that you bring that up because I'm really, really excited about today's interview. It's something it's something that I've been looking forward to for a while. Someone that I really wanted to get a dive deeper into their creative process. What makes them tick. Yeah, no, really. I think the fans will dig it too. And and it's actually kind of a little bit of a surprise.
Well, it sounds intriguing. So
I know.
Who is this?
Well, you probably have heard of him. You might have met him a few times. And when I say met him, I'm really talking on a sort of like philosophical level.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm excited to say that today we're going to talk to Dan Green.
I have met that guy.
Yes. And I'm very excited to do this. So let's, what do you say? Let's get to it.
Welcome to the Heart of the Cards, a conversation about creativity, inspiration, and dealing with what we're dealt.
Hey, this is Eric Stuart.
And this is Dan Green.
And this is episode 24 of The Heart of the Cards. And today, I am going to ask my dear friend and very talented person, Dan Green, some questions about his creative process, his storytelling, and maybe you'll learn some things about him that you didn't know. Welcome, Dan Green.
Well, thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure to talk with you about me.
Now, I have to preface this interview or this series of questions that I'm going to direct to you by saying that normally you're not someone that likes to talk about yourself, and I respect that.
I give you that impression.
Well, I feel like you have the skills, you have the confidence in what you do, but you're not someone to toot your own horn. You're not that guy. I might be that guy for you sometimes. I feel like
I think you have been. Yes.
And it's because I believe in what you do and your abilities. But I'm very curious to know more about all of the processes and the way that that your brain thinks with your interpretations of stories, your creation of stories, all of the things you do, so that not only do I understand more about that from you, but that the listeners do as well. And I think today I'm going to let you take off throw the reins into the wind, if that's even an expression I'm going to make up. I think that's going to be my new T-shirt.
Throw the reins into
the wind. I want you to feel like you can talk about yourself today and not be as self-effacing as your charming self is.
Okay. The floodgates are open.
Okay. So we know a lot about each other from the voice acting world. I've had the pleasure of directing you on a bunch of shows. I've also had the pleasure of you directing me, and also we've acted together on things. And but that's sort of our small window of the big picture. And so I'm just curious. Let's talk about the different hats that you wear in your career paths. Let's start with more of a broader sense of the acting. I don't know you from your stage performances, or anything like that. So I'm just curious if you can educate me and the listeners a little bit more about the way you process someone else's words and that experience.
Right. Well, the someone else's words part is also consistent with the VO stuff that we've done together.
Yes.
So so that part of it is very much the same principle, and what's even more important than understanding what you're saying is meaning what you're saying. And if you understand the meaning of what that moment is in the story of the exchange between the characters and whatever's going on, that's how I got through a lot of that Yu-Gi-Oh terminology that I was completely unfamiliar with.
Oh, you mean you didn't understand all those words?
I didn't.
I directed the show and I didn't understand all those words.
I still don't. But I have nothing but respect for both forms of acting. They are both absolutely, truly legitimate forms of acting, and that part of it there is quite similar between voiceover and on stage stuff, and they both have some advantages and disadvantages. I have been able to perform characters I would never be cast as physically, and that's so much fun. And especially when you're doing audiobooks, I've portrayed so many females at this point,
right?
And those, it was wonderful for me to have the chance to portray those kinds of characters. But with the onstage stuff though too, it has some advantages of you work in a much more full way, which doesn't mean it's more acting necessarily, but you're using your whole body, your physicality. You're working off of another actor, which is very rare in most voiceover. There's some prelay stuff, but that's you and I know that's not a lot of what we see.
No,
right?
And of course, radio commercials. I mean, I'm sure both of us have done a bunch of those where we two character things and playing off each other. But no, that's not the same.
No, not nearly. So the opportunity when you're doing a play, and this also applies to doing some stuff on camera. Although if you're shooting a movie, that's a very different way of working. But but in doing a play, you have time to go over that material. Like you do sets of music. It's the advantage that you get when you perform something multiple times,
right?
And how to hit certain things and set yourself up, and what you need to really do what you want with it, and so forth. So theater has a lot of those advantages, but also a lot more challenges. You don't get to retake. You do have to have it memorized and all that stuff. But I would say that while I've been showered with a lot of praise for voiceover things that I've done, I would love to do some sort of stage piece or maybe on camera to show what else I can do. Yeah. But I also in just day-to-day life, I'm like, doing a play is really unrealistic when you have two kids, and it's a very time-consuming thing. But maybe someday.
So you feel the pull. That's something, being on that stage, that live energy, that little bit of nervous energy that goes along with there are
that's part of the life. That's
right.
Yeah, that's part of the. I do enjoy bungee jumping, so there's a similarity.
Yeah, well, maybe there's a combination. Maybe you can come up with something that's the right platform for that, but maybe it's a short run. Maybe it's only maybe it's filmed or something so that you can work around also being super dad.
Sure, but it's very demanding. Like after I was transitioning in my career from stage to getting into voiceover stuff, which made life a lot easier in a lot of ways. Because when you go do a show, you're out of town, or you're doing a show in New York, but even that is still you're gone for the evenings. If I were pursuing theater when I was first developing my relationship with Michael, who became my wife, I made out of that relationship would have been strained, right? That would have been a big negative impact.
That's true.
And yeah. So anyway, go ahead.
I was going to say, so can we talk about the physical side of it too? Because that's very different than what I know you from. We both. I know we gesture with our hands. There's physicality that goes on in the
Oh,
booth,
sure, of course,
to get
of
into
course.
character, but we keep our nose pointed at the mic. That's the whole point.
Right.
Do you find that when you're obviously the director is giving you some guidance of where to stand, and this is not my
for the blocking of the play.
the blocking, yes, yeah, these are the terminology that I don't use so much in my world, but I'm familiar
Right.
with it. But do you find, and I ask this because I know a lot of people feel like their hands, or what do I do with my hands? What do I do with my, you start to think about those things during a live show. I mean, even, as a musician, I usually have my guitar in my hand. So, I've got that prop, right? I can do something. Even if I'm not playing it, I can hold it. And I'm like, I'm not just standing there. Do you find that becomes like you get inside your head sometimes when you haven't really been told what to do physically?
Well, this is why we have rehearsal.
Right.
And so there is no way that you're going to pick up a script and put on a play in one night. You could do a play reading.
Right.
But, the whole point is it's an art form that you take time creating. It's not, a lot of what we do in VO is fairly instantaneous, right? There's a lot of improv, right?
Yep.
Ideally, when you're working through the behavior of the character, which is part of your job as an actor, you're finding what's the physicality that fits the character and the moment and the energy between, and you don't want to be locked into it like dance choreography because that doesn't look like human behavior. And you want to be open to what's happening on stage. You have to perform within certain barriers, certain parameters, but there's room for improvisation within that. And that keeps you alive in the performance, right? It's not a recitation of lines and a mechanical reproduction of behavior. So anyway, you get those things worked out in the rehearsal process. And what's also similar between stage acting or on-camera acting and voice acting is let's define what an actor's job is. So in basic terms, it's the actor's job to portray the character in a story and the story within the character.
Okay.
Do you understand what I mean? So there should be something like, you could also describe it as an arc for a character. But there has to be something going on for your character. And storytelling is really the heart of what I think I'm most interested in doing creatively. Whether it's acting or drawing or writing, I am always going at that thing. I don't think I've ever taken out my sketch pad or now my iPad Pro to do some drawing just to see how well I can represent a bowl of fruit, do a still life, you know? For some people, that's fun. I'm not knocking that. I am always trying to draw a character in a situation so I can tell a story. Or what's the story of that illustration?
Okay.
Right?
So that's an interesting common thread to go to transition from
for sure.
the acting side of that into the
we can go there.
Yeah, I would like to. So because it's interesting to me. I've seen some of your rough sketches as you're developing things. I also noticed that it seems. This is my perspective on some of your the creative process from the very beginning is. The figure's pose is so important.
Oh, sure.
To the story.
That's body language,
right?
Which exactly goes right back to the theater thing.
That's what I'm
so
connecting.
Right. So one of the disciplines when you're trained in a classical manner, there's a whole thing called movement, and that's about how you move your body on the stage, and it goes from very basic understandings of how meaningful that is and just how your body works, and into more refined things like if you're doing a period piece, this is how people moved at that time, like during the Edwardian period or the Elizabethan period or whatever. Things that I think probably are details that fall by the wayside for the most part in our modern
portrayal of those eras. We tend to modernize people a lot from back then. Right.
Now, anyway.
Do you find that it's because you were such a comic book fan and paying attention to the figures and the way that they were posed in the drawings of your favorite comics growing up that helped you understand the physicality needed for those types of characters on stage, or are we talking vice versa? Was it your, I've done a bunch of plays and on-camera things where I've been directed to do these things and I've studied how people move for this type of a character or with this period piece, and now when I take those ideas into my drawings, into the art form of creating comics or animated series, things like that, the pose that you're picking is because you understand from the stage.
I would say if they interrelate at all, and I'm not sure that they do, but it's a very smart question. I would say that in regards to the drawing of poses, initially I'm thinking about cool poses that I've seen in comic books for sure, and copying stuff just to learn how to do it. But also, I'm thinking about what do I need the character to do in the story, and how I'm often seeing it like you would imagine television or a movie,
right?
And also a beautiful part of storytelling in comics when you're illustrating is you have one moment, a panel, to represent a much bigger area of time. So what would be 5 minutes of action, cool action sequences in a movie is expressed as economically and as simply as possible in a comic book, right? You can't have if you did a comic book like storyboards of the coolest sequence that you most recently saw, it would be like 3 comic books of just like action, right? You need to condense and convey the idea of the bigger story in just the illustration. But anyway, but when it comes to the physical poses, I would say that learning about the physicality of acting, and I was drawing way before I was doing any acting,
right?
And so that helped me understand how much story you could tell given the pose of a character.
Yeah, I think what I was also getting at was the fact that you have found a way, and I'd love to talk a little bit about some of the creation of your characters that you've been doing for many, many years. You have found a way to take a full scene and condense it into a single pose. I get a lot of, and that character's personality. I get the character's personality and probably understand a little bit more than what that one picture could tell me because of the way that you've put that character, the pose you've put them in. One thing I thought was really cool was you showed me some of the modeling. I don't know what you call your figures, the figurines, the posable wood figurines that you can move to different shapes to sort of give you that which I thought was really cool. Like I've seen those before, but I didn't really think like, oh, of course, if I take that and I actually can take my hands and move it around the way.
Right.
But anyway, can you tell me a little bit about that process of being able to have more with less, right? It's quality over quantity. You have condensed all of this stuff into a single image, but it still tells that story.
And what are you saying about the character? What story is it? Illustrators think in big, expansive ways. I loved listening to the process of people who do creature design for movies or whatever else. Doug Chiang did a lot of the design work for the Star Wars movies, going back to the prequel trilogy. And say what you will about the storytelling in those prequel trilogies, but the design work, the visual imagination was on fire. I mean, that stuff just looks great, right? And the way that they think about the world and around this thing, and so for them, it's like even a droid or a kind of ship. The choices are made for certain reasons because it exists in a world right? And so that it's really fun to think about drawing from that perspective. But sometimes, you're also just like, I want to draw a cool pose. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, But yeah, but if our through line is the storytelling stuff, you're creating a moment of time with imagery, and what that says and suggests, and this is especially why I love comics, because you create sequences of that, right? And so how those things add up can be really compelling, especially with a very talented illustrator, given the time to do the work that they need to do. So, yeah.
So, sequence question in terms of chicken or egg. So, yeah, do you draw an idea first and then think, how can I tell this person's story? Or do you write the story? Because I know you're also a talented storyteller in terms of your writing.
Thank you.
Do you write a sort of synopsis, a short story version of it, or some ideas, and then say, well, if this character is this character should look like this?
It's definitely gestating in my mind. I often keep so much stuff in my head. And so when it gets to creating an image, I very often have already thought about the idea for a while. That's what usually happens.
Of the image, not the story.
No, actually, probably the other way. So more specifically, I've thought about the world of the story, without even specifically thinking about the plot. Right. Sometimes, a lot of times, actually, the last couple of days, I've been tweaking Sigma 8, who Wayne Grayson portrays in Crossing the Gods. I've been tweaking his character's design, and so I have that character in neutral poses just because I'm working out details. Right. But that's part of the process. So that's important for obviously the finished illustration.
Right.
But it also enhances my understanding of the world the character's in, the character themselves, and what I want the story to feel like. So
story first. So story or world first, right? The environment.
That's usually what happens. I get this idea,
right,
and then I try to work out a part of it with an image, or I try to tell a part of it, the story, with an image.
Okay, because I also have been in places with you where we've been walking through like the lobby of a cool building or passing a neat wall somewhere, and you want to take a picture as this would be cool. This is inspiration. This could work well for this particular scene that I'm working on. So
we respond to spaces that way. You do a lot of work on your home. I commend you for that. I admire that. You understand the value of physical space and how we right.
Well, I just think it's so cool. You're so visual with that stuff. It influences you so much and inspires you so much that's why I would have thought that maybe you were like, oh, I like that gargoyle on the side of that building. You know what? I'm going to take the eyes from that and I'm going to put it on a character that I want to develop. I don't know where this character is going to live, but that's the face I want to start drawing. But you almost want to make sure you know where that gargoyle type person is going to live, what environment they're in.
Likely, I already have the story in mind, and I'm like, "Oh, that's a great reference for that."
That's cool.
When I'm doing
I do like that.
And hey, to tie these things a little bit more together, so I understudied a North American tour of Death Trap.
Yes.
I understudied the role of Cliff, who's in the movie, the Christopher Reeve role.
I love.
Bear in mind, I loved
that
much.
story.
I was in my 20s. I loved it too. I loved the movie when I was a kid.
Great movie.
And so maybe that's what helped me get the job. Now, who was on stage, who I was understudying, an actor, Doug Wirt, and a great guy, and I was not at his level. Right, he had done more stuff in the industry. Right, so it was only appropriate. Right, that I was a subordinate, right, to that, because there is a whatever class system of or echelons of how people are. But anyway, The lead was Elliot Gould. It was fun to get to work with him.
Wow.
So yeah, and Marriott Hartley, and then Marriott Hartley, who I know you know, was replaced by Cindy Williams.
Wow.
So I got to know Cindy Williams.
What a cool project. That's really great cast. Yes.
The one of the big reasons that was so amazing for me was it afforded me the funds to buy myself a video camera.
Oh.
And I have shot so much video. And I've always been thinking about movie making or just storytelling and which includes visual stuff, which, movie making falls into, right? But anyway, so I've always been this way, right? There's always been a collection of these things.
Yeah,
So.
I know. I think it's great, and also what's kind of cool is because of the stage performance side, right? You can become these characters that you're also creating. Like, even if it might not be what's in that particular script or that story, you could even say, well, this is very similar to this character that I've been working on.
There's a lot of storytelling that's repeated.
Yeah.
And I mean that in a good way, right?
Yeah.
These classic stories, that's myths, right? So,
right.
Anyway.
So if you're like, oh, I've got this sort of devious, scheming character that I've been working on. And then look, I'm doing this Shakespeare play. I'm going to bring that into this character of a well-known performance.
And while you may not want to, I never think it's a good idea to replicate a performance.
Right.
But an attitude, a perspective that the character comes from, that's what you work with actively, right?
Yeah.
And so, you can bring elements of one character to another character, and those characters express themselves very differently vocally and physically. Like, they're not alike in that way, right? But it's their attitude, right? Or their value system, or, their whatever, cunning, whatever.
Right.
But learning how to play. I never thought of myself as the guy who would be the heroic voice.
You mean when you were doing on stage and on camera stuff before the voiceovers?
Right.
You never thought
I was being cast. I was being cast in leading man stuff.
Right.
But that's different than what I mean by the heroic voice of a cartoon, right?
Yes.
Like, that's not the same thing that people are doing on stage, right? It's just a completely different style, right? Exactly.
Yes.
So, and after the the Yu-Gi-Oh stuff and things that people know me for in that realm. In audiobooks, I've done a lot of the most dangerous guy in the world books where they're out to kill him, and he has for some reason the problems get solved when he kills everybody.
Oh, well, there you go.
For all the right reasons, though, really.
Oh.
No, but I love James Bond, those kinds of, Anyway, but that's kind of like a tough guy, dangerous guy thing. You have to have that, or be able to, convey that edge to the story. I had never thought of myself in those terms.
Well, you play it well, especially in the cartoon world. So speaking of the audio side, the voice, right?
Yeah.
The language. So, the creation of dialogue in storytelling. Now you've done enough plays and
sure.
You have spoken other people's words enough, both in animation and voiceover world, and as well as on stage. So what is your process for capturing the way characters speak? And I'm not talking, and this is for the listener's clarity, I'm not talking about the accent, the dialect. I'm not talking about, the register. How do you capture the rhythm and the choice of words for your characters? What do you use as a creative process for that?
It comes from your understanding of the story. It's all about the story. Choices should be based on being true to the author's intent, in my opinion.
Okay.
This is not a unique opinion. So when it comes to speaking is a behavior. And an actor's job is to behave truthfully under imaginary circumstances. That's a definition by Sanford Meisner, and it's a very good one. so you're trying to do that in service of this idea of the character. So obviously, braver character is going to react differently to a dangerous situation, right, than somebody who's more timid. And what is the character doing? Why was Alan Rickman such a great villain? Partly because he was so good at being condescending. He presumes to be a challenge to the hero, right? I loved him in Die Hard. I mean, who didn't?
Right.
Right. But and then it's so satisfying to see him get his comeuppance. Anyway, but he's attacking in the way that he says things to people, right?
Right.
And so those are called actions. Is what the character is doing, right? And then you also think about, well, how are they doing it? You could have had a very different portrayal of Hans from Die Hard and just change the actions where, like, behind the lines, and the character would come off completely differently. Like, he would be more conciliatory. I mean, that's not the right way to play the character.
Right.
But like I'm just showing that's what the range of you need to understand as an actor, especially with characters who are underwritten, who don't have a clear, detailed perspective. You got to fill that in to feel like you're actually inhabiting a character.
Well, that's the acting approach to those words. I want to get into how does Dan Green, the writer, capture the dialogue for his characters. What tools do you use to figure out a way so that the characters' cadence and rhythm are not similar to every other one? I mean, obviously, if you were writing a period piece and everybody was in the 1940s and they were, speaking with a mid-Atlantic accent, and that's that sort of, the pace and the types of words chose. Right. Yes. But like, I remember when I in high school, one of a cool class I was in was a playwriting class, and one of our exercises was to go to a diner by ourselves and just sit there with a notepad and just listen to the way people had conversations around you, just to hear. Because when you start to write, sometimes you write, it's stiff. It's like people don't speak like this in real life, even if they are very formal. So what do you use as a starting point for coming up with the way you write dialogue?
So I love that story, and it's important to observe. I'm sure this was done. This was the point of the lesson, perhaps, that dialogue is not regular conversation. But you do want to listen to regular conversation to get an understanding of how people actually talk.
Right.
But you're also moving a story along, and you don't want to waste people's time. Or at least I am very committed to not wasting the audience's time. I try to tell as much story as concisely and fast, and I mean as well as possible.
Right.
So part of what makes good dialogue is it's in service of moving the story along. You want it to do, and as the audience, what you experience is that things are developing. We've seen a lot of shows where they're padded, right? There's not really a lot going on in the scene.
Exactly.
The characters talk about having a talk later about something or whatever. You know what I mean?
We're going to talk about talking.
I'm not knocking. Writing is a hard job, and they have to fill out those, episode numbers, and I get it. I have nothing but respect for people who write, because that's where it all begins.
Right. But you want to move the story. I was going to say, you want to move
you
want to move the story along. But you don't want to make it sound like you're just guiding
moving the story along. Right. And there's different kinds of story. Like some pieces are more character pieces. So the point is not the plot, right? The point is how over the course of that time you get to understand these characters better and better. And that's the enrichment. That's the fun of the story. Right. And other stories, it's all about the action of the plot, and that can be very fun too. But anyway, so when I'm doing dialogue for characters, I block out what needs to get done in the scene first, because I don't want to create a scene that the story doesn't need.
Okay.
And some scenes are about getting to understand what's going on within the characters, and so I'm not suggesting that exposition is even optional. It's better if the story has that in it, right? Because you want to convey the depth of the whole story and the experience in the world they're in. But you don't want it to sound like, hey, remember when we met in college and became best friends and you betrayed me, but I got over it a few weeks later? Right.
That's going to be our next project, just full exposition.
But a bad writer would write that to establish that there's a level of familiarity and distrust between these characters.
Sure.
Now, that's an interesting tension in a relationship, but don't do it that way.
Right. So,
then you unbe. Oh, go ahead.
You have content that you're trying to get across. I get that.
Right.
But tell me how you bring in the way
make it individual.
Talk. Yeah.
Right. So then you're getting to know the characters as you're telling the story.
Yeah.
You get clearer and clearer ideas about not only what looks good for them, what serves the story, obviously, but also what is interesting about this character. Some characters are necessary to a story, but you don't really have an opinion about them yet.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You haven't developed them as a full-on three-dimensional being, and so sometimes just like an actor filling out moments for a character that's underwritten, as a writer you need to know who the characters are pretty fully, right? If you need to do anything with them that's relevant. So anyway, but and then as you get to understand them better, their way of speaking becomes clearer, right? You get a sense for what sounds off.
Mm-hmm.
So
you write more when you're writing out that first draft of their dialogue. You write more from a place of more of a neutral delivery or choice of words, and then you go back over it and tweak it so that it really reflects what that character is, who that character is. But do you have a way, a reference? Do you look at other film examples?
Sure, yeah.
Do you are you an eavesdropper to the riding on the train or stopping in at a restaurant and listening? You're saying, oh, I'm writing something that guy kind of reminds me of what I'm doing. I'm just going to listen.
Sure,
What do you dive into it that deeply, or is it from memories of movies and things that you liked, or do you recall that stuff, or do you actually physically look it up as reference?
Well, I think it's important when you're working within a genre to understand what your story will be compared to, so that you avoid certain forms of comparison, and you don't want to be just derivative.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly I pick up storytelling from stories that I've experienced either as a piece of music or a comic book or a movie. But also in terms of things happening in real life around you, storytelling is happening all the time. I mean, it's kind of the way that our brains create memories and just sort of we tend to package things up in terms of this happened, then this happened, then this happened, and anyway, because it's all around you, I think it's inevitable that there's going to be, and it also depends for me in terms of where my head is, in the moment. So more often I'm thinking about sort of the world of whatever the story is, what makes sense, what other kinds of stories can we tell, that sort of a thing. And sometimes I'm imagining exchanges and scenes between characters. But sometimes, something happens in real life. And, well, for example, there was this story I started when I was 15, and it takes place in the future, and there's this plot about criminal boss hiring the best thief to steal the evidence that the government now has on them. Right? And then things go awry from there. But I needed an inciting incident. What was cranking up the stakes so that the law enforcers were now pressing down harder on this well-established criminal boss? And so I thought, I'll reference the Oklahoma City bombing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was living in New York during 9/11.
Right.
And it was like, now I don't know if I would keep that. actually. In this, I would maybe change the event because it's so, people will so directly relate it to the specifics of 9/11.
Right.
But that's an example of I already had a story going on, and what would this be like? And unfortunately, we lived through it.
Right.
But yeah.
So no, that's very interesting, and it's interesting too, the connection between these three pieces of how you tell stories and storytelling, from being on stage to drawing characters and to also writing the stories that go along with all of that. What is your? This is kind of like when you say the paint is dry, or like I can't fix a song once I've released it and it's been put out in the universe and people have downloaded it or whatever. I put out a different version of it, right? The acoustic version of that rock song, whatever. But when do you decide the paint is dry? And I don't mean literally, unless you've been painting something, which you do, I'm sure, as well.
Sometimes.
But when do you decide in your creative process, okay, this is done? Is it I've put it out there in the world? It's on the canvas. The paint is literally dry, and I am now going to move on to something else. Here you are talking about tweaking a story that you started years and years ago as it's evolving. If you had published that, would you have said, well, I need to revise it? I'm just curious of what is your sort of finality. I'm putting the stake down. I'm done.
Right. I think there's probably nothing better for a creative person than a deadline.
Okay.
Getting and being able to give yourself your own deadline I'm still learning how to do. And when it comes to illustrating stuff, I've gotten better at saying, okay, now I can walk away. And you can always do more, of course. But I think without that point where you need to step away, you could never get something done. That may mean continually tweaking it forever.
Right. Or
you may never even start doing it, which is, I think, much more common, at least for me.
Mm-hmm.
And when you walk away, what you can't do is leave it where you're aware, you feel it in your bones that it could be substantially better. Mm-hmm. Could it be a little bit better? Everything could be a little bit better.
Sure.
So, I think that's basically the standard. And sometimes you think you're improving stuff when you revisit it, but you're not really. You're just changing it. Right?
Sure. Well, that's also. I mean, sometimes when we're doing that, we sort of ruin that initial idea.
That can happen. George Lucas on the special editions of Star Wars.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Did I say that out loud?
Yeah. But you're allowed to say the quiet part out loud. But yeah, I'm curious because we both create and we both share with each other things in the works. So, and by doing that, we both know that it's not. Neither one of these things are done, right? They're not done.
Exactly.
But what giving yourself that deadline, giving yourself that, this is when I'm going to release this. What do you do to convince yourself I'm done? How? And it's going to change with every project, right? But how do you feel like I've written this short story? It's ready to be shared with the world. And if I share it with the world, then Dan, it's done. Yep.
So I'm glad you used that example because I wanted to talk about that process. There was a contest, whatever, and it was a short story contest. And so that gave me a deadline. Mm-hmm. And I had been narrating a lot of audiobooks, so I had been thinking in that terms of prose, right? And so I tried to create a story within the context of what this contest was looking for, and it was such a wonderful process, and I relied on my friends and some family members to give me their reactions. I also needed some some perspective. There's some military stuff that another family member had a good understanding of. So I just want to make sure the terminology I was using made sense, and so on and so forth. So so that's a process of getting reaction. Sometimes you know the story you're telling and you think you're telling it, but if the audience isn't hearing it back, then you need to adjust something, right? And also, from feedback, new ideas occur along the way, and that short story, the first draft of it, compared to the final draft of it, is a very different reading experience, but pretty much the same story. So I didn't change really much of the concept of the story, but I did change the way it was told, and for the better. And I worked up the courage to have one of the authors that I narrate for regularly. I said, "Would you mind giving this a pass and giving me, whatever reactions you have? I'd really appreciate it," or words to that effect. And he read it immediately, got back to me in a couple of days. And what I really appreciated about his feedback was that it revealed he had a specific understanding of the story. He really read it. He had all the details. Well, without reciting them, I could tell that he really paid attention, which was so generous. And he had nothing but positive things to say, which is always nice to hear, but especially from a published New York Times bestselling author.
Yeah, nicely done.
He thought it could be. He saw it in terms of being a novel, which is much longer than a short story. But the thing, getting back to being as concise as possible, the comment that I loved most was he said that I packed a ton of exposition in 30 pages, but it all felt natural.
Wow. Nice. That's
yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So, and he also liked that I started immediately with action. That I didn't start with exposition.
Right. So that's it. That's great. I mean, congratulations on that feedback. That's fantastic.
I'm bragging. I'm not so.
I told you were
bragging.
allowed.
I
remember my
true.
new catchphrase. I'm throwing the reins into the wind. Well, I think that's. I mean, this is just a small part of who you are, and it's always fun to
writing. You mean?
All these things. It's like
these things.
I learn so much when we talk more and more about just.
I have stories you haven't even heard yet.
Yeah,
that I've had for years.
Yeah, and your storytelling, that's something that I think is a new part for me to sort of dive into. Obviously, the acting and the drawing. I'm always amazed when I see the stuff that you're putting together, but it's also like. I think for our listeners who are interested in any of these endeavors, as well as all of them, they can hear from someone who, yes, you are known primarily from our fan base. Because of the success of the shows we've worked on.
Sure.
Dan Green is a well-known and respected voice actor. They've learned more and more, as I have, as we've shared in these conversations about the things that also inspire you and that you find your output with creativity. But it also is a great example for those that are trying to do similar things, because yes, what you earn a living doing, and this is my take on all of this stuff, what you earn a living doing does not necessarily mean that's who you are only, right? So I think of you as you are an actor, you are an artist, and you are a writer, and that's not all you are. But these three things, to me, I have experienced as much of each one of them as I so far in my life, being friends with you and being a coworker with you. I have not experienced enough of your on camera or stage, and I hope that that's something that we will share in the future. But from all pieces of this, it just shows me like, okay, so being a creative soul, that's who you are, not where you made your money, only because you also haven't put the other stuff out there to see if that is what you benefit from. I'm never going to judge art or a creative career choice on income. That's
Yeah.
not where my brain
Right. No.
is. Right.
Right. Of
So
course. Of course.
I've seen your drawings, and they're fantastic. Now, are you
Thank you.
known as a graphic artist? Not yet, but yet you are doing that, and you've done it longer than you've been an actor. You've been
Yeah.
you've been drawing.
Yeah.
So,
But I spent But I would also say that I committed myself to acting much more
yes,
fully.
Right.
Right.
And
I
you
would
became a
draw in the
professional-
background.
Yes. Yes.
Right,
You
right,
became a
right, right.
professional in that part of your creative outlet.
Right.
I get that.
Right.
But you also have, without going maybe to school as much, even though I do know that you studied some drawing with people as you were growing up.
Yeah.
You've gone to the school of life when it's come to that with your fandom of comics, and I mean that's
Yeah.
like going to school. I mean, reading those comics.
You learn from everything.
Exactly.
Well, this gets back to you asked that question about in creating a character, does something happen around you and that can inform your process? It's all informed. I mean, I am delighted to be interested in so many different things because I can find lots of sources of inspiration depending on where my headset is. And I mean, I love sound. I love sound design.
Mm-hmm.
And you know how that can also contribute to storytelling,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And so, and obviously music does too. And I've always loved music. I bet you didn't know that I spent years singing into a 4-track, creating sort of harmonic. I mean, I'm not going to compare myself to Bobby McFerrin in terms of skill level, but it's that kind of singing where you're layering your voice over your voice. And,
wow. So you were
yeah.
using a
Yeah, yeah.
4-track. I know another band
Yeah.
that was using a 4-track for a lot of their songs.
I bet. I
Well,
mean,
that's good.
right. I mean, the two most awesome tools I got to purchase, a 4-track and a mic, and then later that video camera. I mean,
Yeah.
that really, really helped my creativity for sure.
Very cool.
But anyway, that aside, whether it's music from a song or from the sounds around you, or like walking into an interesting space and getting some feel from that, or having witnessed an exchange or been a part of an exchange that helps your understanding of what it is to be human and going through an experience. I mean, those are all things that I get to use and create from and create with, and it's a really fun place to be when I let myself go there.
That's great. No, that's great. And with that, I have to say, there's so much more that I want to dive into with you.
Sure.
And we'll probably do that down the line. But today, let's end there. And I want to give you an opportunity, Dan Green,
Yes.
actor, artist, writer, to what would you say to some of our listeners who are interested in storytelling in any form? Just some words of advice that might help them structure what they're doing and try to find a way to find their own voice in their own stories.
Keep listening. That's what feeds you. I mean, we were just talking about getting inspiration, and so always have that going on. And by listening, I mean, whatever your creative form is, it's going to speak to you in some way. So keep open to that. And when it comes to actually trying to get something done, and there's various different circumstances which we create in, sometimes we have to self-generate, and that requires a lot of discipline. And sometimes we get involved in things where there's a structure, so it's harder to not show up for a rehearsal and let everybody down than it is to say, "Oh, I'll write that poem tomorrow." So, but yeah, keep yourself receiving, because you want to be able to give what it is you have to say in an inspired and connected way. And stories are just a way of understanding an experience. And we express our experiences through so many mediums. So you may not think it does, and not everything has to be a story. I'm not suggesting that. But if that's a path you feel that you're on, keep listening not only to what can inspire you, but keep listening to the story you're telling. See if that story really holds up, and you'll gain from your focus on that, and from being able to refine what it is that you have to say. And I think a big difference between stuff that I did when I was younger to when I was older was that I've gotten better at refining, making those choices. And also creativity is entirely about choices, those would be my general words of what to work with.
Well, I love those words of wisdom, because keep listening is what people should do to the Heart of the Cards as well. So with that, I would like to thank you, Dan Green.
Well, thank you for all the attention and great questions.
You got it. And thank you to all the listeners. We really appreciate it. Hitting that like button, subscribing, all of that stuff is fantastic. We appreciate that.
Thanks to our Patreon donators, our Patreoners,
yes.
Our patrons.
Yes. And
thank you for your support.
Yes. And thank you again for listening to The Heart of the Cards, where we have conversations about inspiration, creativity, and dealing with what you're dealt. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to The Heart of the Cards with Dan Green and Eric Stuart. We hope this conversation in some way spoke to you. Whatever your journey, we look forward to crossing paths again in the next episode. This is Veronica Taylor, and on behalf of Andromeda Productions, we wish you well.
Andromeda, always a sound choice.